So welcome everyone to our Apex 30-minute Thursday. Today's topic is DMF moving to CloudSuite for supply chain management. I'm Lynette Thibault, a solution architect with Apex Systems and your presenter. Before we get started, let me get a little housekeeping out of the way. Our goal today is to share our experience and provide guidance for supply chain in preparation for a data migration to FSM or Infor Financials and Supply Management. If you're considering using Infor's Data Migration Factory or DMF for short. We will not be covering DMF for finance or HR, as these topics are addressed in some of our other sessions. But please do ask questions in the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll try to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. We will be covering a lot of ground, but we plan on having some time at the end to be able to answer questions. Finally, we are recording this completed webinar so that it's viewable in the future. Just a bit about Apex. We're a division of ASGN Inc., serving 300 of the Fortune 500 in all major industries. Our solutions are highly scalable and deliverable nationally with over 180 unique IT skill sets and over 70 branch locations across the US, Europe, Mexico, and India. Specifically, our Infor practice has experience in more than just healthcare to service many Infor clients, as well as those using Epic, Cerner, and Kronos. As the second largest IT staffing and service provider, we can fill just about any role. Most of all, our Infor practice works with clients beyond the cloud, offering the right services at the right time. Before the project, our advisory services guide the client through the selection process and assess organizational readiness through BPA and process design. We offer total program governance and change management services to start clients off on the right foot for their implementation. During the project, we offer prescriptive guidance to reduce risk, duration, and cost. And after the project, managed services helps clients sustain their investment through on-demand service, staff augmentation, and incident support to be your partner before, during, and after the project. Now that you know a bit more about Apex, just a bit about me. I'm an Apex solution architect for supply chain with our Infor practice at Apex Systems and have been in the Infor Lawson space for about 16 years with 6 years as a consultant. I've held roles as an AP clerk, a buyer, data systems analyst, and data systems manager before making my way into consulting. So for today, we'll start off with a brief overview of DMF and its application. Then we'll talk about the importance of data in the process, staffing considerations, prioritization, and finally preparation for your migration experience. So we'll get started with our overview and talk a bit about the data migration options. Current Lawson customers can use one of two options when migrating to Infor Financials and Supply Management, or FSM, as you'll hear me call it most of the time today. Conversion, you can do this through conversion or the Data Migration Factory, or DMF. With a conversion, the client data is retrieved from Lawson. The data is then translated into the format required for import into FSM, usually via spreadsheet or some type of electronic file. The final data is imported or uploaded into the FSM environment and then validated by the client. With DMF, that client data is retrieved from the Lawson environment as a backup. The Infor DMF process uses this backup, translates that data, and then loads it into the FSM environment to be validated against your former Lawson environment. So a little bit of a difference between the two methodologies. When the conversion method is a little more time consuming and labor intensive. DMF kind of puts the background work onto Infor to get that data from your backup file into your FSM system. Some of the features with DMF, it's an Infor provided conversion as a service. The process uses automated logic to convert finance and supply chain customer data from legacy Lawson to an Infor FSM system instance. So let's talk a bit about the data. The recommendation is to migrate 3 years of transactional data. That includes requisitions, POs, receipts, invoices, GL activity, plus anything open, which is your service POs with any remaining balances, open POs, open projects, transactions tied to any of the above. And then the other data included is the entire item master, your entire item master, all contracts, whether open, closed, on hold, and are expired, your inventory transactions, and MSCM if it's part of the extract from V10 or from your legacy system. When it comes to the MSCM, I highly advise you to do it. Make sure that Infor knows you're going to migrate that MSCM data so that when it comes out, so that it will come over with the migration and be part of that backup that they take. Otherwise, you'd be starting from scratch in FSM or rebuilding MSCM based on your current setup, and it's quite labor intensive there as well. Plus, you lose all that historical data in the new system that was contained in your legacy MSCM system. So it is worth pointing out. This is the data that will be placed into the new system when the migration is complete, and we'll have some recommendations for that data in later slides. Just a few limitations. Merging multiple Lawson product lines is not allowed with DMF. It's one product line per FSM instance. If you're going to restructure or rename your subsystem data points like items, inventory locations, PAR locations, that's not going to be feasible with DMF. They come over just as they are from your legacy system. And then if you are interested in doing a phased migration of different modules, like maybe starting with finance and then adding SCM later into FSM, that's not going to be possible with DMF. It's an all or nothing approach to moving that data from your legacy system to FSM. And then finally, there's some financial structure limitations. This was discussed in our previous session for financial considerations for DMF that you may want to take into account when contemplating your migration with DMF. These factors may be key in your decision whether to use the conversion method or DMF for your implementation, just depending on how your organization would like to migrate to the new platform. So the migration process itself, for each DMF run, there are necessary steps to follow to get the data from one place to another. With pre-migration, the pristine environment is developed or updated depending on which run you're on, right? For Infor to set the stage for the data in your production system. You'll map some information from Lawson for use in FSM, like your requesters, your buyers, your contract admins, etc. And then you'll also be completing a migration questionnaire. Just a note that if you're using IC 142 users or like a dummy requester for your replenishment by requisition, those will all convert to actual employees until a system user is created for that purpose in FSM, should you want to go that route. On the Infor DMF questionnaire, you define the FSM starting point for purchase orders. Purchase order numbers, the legacy numbers will reside in the PO reference field that is searchable. You may also elect to bring all contracts over in draft state. So if you've got quite a number of contracts currently in your system, you could, and you're not sure what you want to do with them. Once you get them over to FSM, they can all come over in a draft state. And it allows you to make changes in FSM or to delete or revise them before they're actually activated. Just be aware that this process could take some time depending on how many contracts or vendor agreements you have. There are some pre-migration tasks to perform in the legacy system to ready the data. Then you'll create a backup of your V10 system for the migration. And just reminder to be sure to include your MSCM data unless you want to start from scratch in FSM. For the migration itself, that backup file is transmitted into Infor via an automated process. The pristine FEG and converted data are imported into the target FSM environment. And then finally, for post-migration, you'll meet with the Infor migration team to discuss any anomalies or portions that couldn't be migrated, why they couldn't be migrated, and what will need to be done. For example, ED40 entries that had improper spacing, orphan records, things of that nature. What might be improved maybe on the next run, or what may need to be corrected if this is your go live run. So, and then you will complete your post-migration tasks to ready the new system and validate your migrated data. It is important to point out that during the migration, and that's this section here, at the bottom, your downtime, I wanted to point that out, that during the migration and post-migration periods, you'll be under system downtime as the copy is taken from your legacy system until you can use the new environment so that you can validate that data. If you do not currently have downtime procedures in place, take the time to develop them. You'll want your users to know what to do and how to get the supplies that they need during this transitional period. The timing can range from days to hours, depending on the amount of data and any issues occurring during that migration. So there are 5 delivered migration runs with DMF, 3 for your testing phases, 1 for mock go live, and 1 for go live or cutover. So as you see here, you've got your first one for CRP, which is your conference room pilot, where you'll have an initial discovery conversion, helping to identify initial conversion times and data abnormalities. This is very early on in the project, so anything that is, amiss here can be easily corrected. Your second run will be done before system integrated testing. And then following this conversion, your RICE elements should be tested and validated. So during your system integrated testing, we want to, use the data that comes over with the DMF to test and validate your reports, your interfaces, any configurations or extensions that may be needed in your new FSM system that we found as we walk through CRP. And then for user acceptance testing, or UAT, following this phase, users will test your end-to-end processes for acceptance of the system. So it's kind of important, at some point that we know what our processes are and what is the methodology we're using to achieve them. Your 4th DMF run will be just before your mock go live, and this is a phase that's going to validate transmission and the conversion timing. So it's your first 3 runs kind of help you to improve incrementally, but your mock go live should give you a real indication of how long it's going to take to convert that data from your legacy system to your live production system of FSM. This is a good time to also validate your downtime procedures as well. And then finally, you have your cutover run or for go live. And then once this is complete, your conversion data is going to be stored for 90 days post go live. The continuous flow that kind of surrounds all of these milestones of the DMF process is your project work time, basically. The time in between milestones can vary depending on preparation needs for each phase, and you'll work with Infor and your implementation team to schedule those milestones, being your 5 DMF migration runs. There are tasks to perform to ready the data for each DMF, and there is downtime, but there's still time for the organization to perform other tasks related to each stage of the implementation and get more comfortable with the new system, such as independent training or test script development. So that's what the space in between, that's where we would expect those activities to occur. So though many clients look to complete an implementation in around 12 months, that's where they think they're happy. We typically see happier customers when the total project timeline is about 18 months. So I do want to speak a bit about your data and its involvement with the supply chain DMF process, because much of the SCM data is migrated in entirety, like your item master and your contracts. It's important to consider data prep in conjunction with your data migration options. First item of note is clean your data. Data is the most valuable asset in the world. If you don't know who Brittany Kaiser is, Google her. It's a pretty interesting read, but her background is not relevant to this discussion, but the quote is, "Data is the most valuable asset in the world," and important enough that I have said it twice. As it relates to this topic, think of it like this. Your home is likely your most valuable asset, right? Maybe it's your car or your complete Funko Pop Star Wars collection. I don't know you. But whatever it is, if you never clean or care for your home, car, collections, throw away clutter, make repairs, keep it in the box, how well do you think that asset is going to serve you in the future? What's your ROI going to be when you're ready to upgrade to something better or newer? Probably not as much as you value it. Same applies to data. Keep it clean, purge it on a schedule and within your organization's data retention policy. Archive it for history if you have the storage, but get it out of your live system if you can. When I was on the client side of Infor, we had a loss and archive environment. We kept 10 years of rolling data and set up in there, but our live system only held 3 years of active data. So for daily reporting and operations, we used our live system. For any historical data, we could access that archive. FSM has very similar functionality with the data lake to store archive data. So you don't have to throw away all, don't throw away all your Funko Pops, just display the valuable ones, right? If you have 10,000 contracts and half of them are expired or closed going back to 2008, review, archive, and purge them. Why bring all that useless data into your new system? The same is going to apply to requisitions, inventory transactions, purchase orders, and MSCM data. Make a plan and clean house, right? Run the loss and data validation toolkit on a regular basis, even if it's just in report mode, to keep a check on it. Review it, take action to clear orphaned records, run it in update mode periodically within your organizational guidelines to help keep your system running smoothly and in a good state. Also, keep a check on unreleased requisitions, purchase orders, receipts, inventory transactions, and buyer messages. and develop policy around how they are handled. Those must all be addressed during pre-migration, so planning early only helps you down the road and helps to speed the migration process. Not necessarily DMF related, but review your jobs and interfaces and the data that you might be pulling for third-party vendors. Do you need to keep doing that? Do you know why these files are being created? And do you know what's in the data? You know, it's like, who's on first? I don't know. He's on third. You get the picture, but know your team, so to speak, right? And then finally, perform the data copy of your prod system during scheduled downtime. Lock people out and copy. You don't want Joe counting apart 1 a.m. to cause you to have orphan data in your migration copy. Plan for it. Finish all transactions by the end of the day and perform your copy. Some other data considerations. Prepare for mapping in, what I mean by that is in FSM, users are linked to employees that are linked to numbers. DMF maps your legacy requesters, buyer codes, contract admins, and procurement card users to FSM employee numbers. Be aware, if your employee numbers have leading zeros, those leading zeros must be part of your mapping. For example, DMF has you complete a migration questionnaire where you provide a default requester in the event one cannot be met. If you're missing those leading zeros in your requester mapping table, all your migrated requisitions will fall under the designated default requester. So it is worth pointing out, right? For your items, numbering does not have to change unless you want it to. Your legacy number is held in reference field 1 of the item business class and is searchable. So you won't lose it, it just may change. User fields themselves do not migrate with your onto your items, but the data in them does. So if you're using user fields tied to your items in your item master in your legacy system, they will have to be configured once you get to FSM post migration. The same applies to other document user fields. The data will come over, but the functionality within FSM will just have to be added post migration. Requisitions are not auto renumbered, mostly because they're tied to other transactions, and that would be very cumbersome to do. However, your purchase orders will be renumbered per your specifications per company on your DMF questionnaire. So just kind of reiterate this, your DMF questionnaire is gathering a lot of information that you want in your new system as it relates to your migrated data. So this is another one of those points that they do collect with that questionnaire. The legacy PO number is housed in your PO reference 1 field of your purchase order for continuity, and it is also searchable. POs created will have, no FSM revisions because technically they are new in your new system. They may reference revisions, but none will exist in the audit. So that was, as of today, we've experienced an issue that if you change a migrated PO that creates a revision on that new purchase order, you'll need some Infor assistance to create a user action to renumber that revision and complete that change. It was just an issue that we did run across in previous clients. Inventory, there's no longer the ability to create a dummy requester for like your replenishment by requisition jobs. It will map to an actual employee number. So each inventory location replenished by requisition will need to have a user requester assigned to create replenishment requisitions. If it wasn't assigned in V10, it will not map to FSM and will need to be added as part of the configuration. No matter who runs the replenishment by requisition job, this will always be the designated requester. So you can have a system user created for this purpose if you like after migration, but it will need the same security as a regular inventory requester. Inventory transactions will all be renumbered. The legacy transaction type and number will be held in reference field 1 of the inventory transaction record, and it is also searchable. So you won't lose the data or the visibility to it. It'll just be in a different place. Finally, of note, any MSTM any MSTM transactions, will also be renumbered in FSM, and there's not a differentiation between the FSM, the new transactions moving forward with MSCM versus the legacy MSCM transactions. So we had a client that had an LBI report to show only MSCM issues that they pulled from Lawson, but we couldn't replicate it with FSM because those new MSCM transactions were just followed the same suit as regular issues from FSM. So just a blurb about that. Suppliers. If you are using contract management with V10, you should be good to go. Suppliers will migrate just as they are with applied emails, security questions, and passwords. If you're only using vendor agreements like PO25 to house your contract information, the migration creates a supplier per vendor associated with each migrated contract. This goes back to purging of old data. If you've got expired or closed contracts that you will never use again, why bring over the associated vendor suppliers to manage them in FSM? Migrated suppliers created from the vendor agreements only use the H10 information to populate those contacts and email addresses for those suppliers. So that is a point to note as well. So if you don't want that information, if you want different information to be populated for your suppliers, it can be changed. It'll be part of your post-migration process. And you'll need to work with your implementation partner to make those changes. If you're only using PO25 to manage contracts, contract numbering will be applied in FSM. The vendor agreement reference becomes the working contract ID in FSM. It is searchable. The agreement is given a number for which you cannot specify a start number. They all start with 1. And your vendor agreement description 1 field becomes that contract name. So if you want your newly migrated contracts to appear a certain way once they get to your new FSM system, you can correct that in your V10 system before the migration so that it'll all migrate the way that you want it. And you won't have to change it once it gets to FSM. You'll first be able to see this during your CRP to note how that data migrates and have the opportunity to make any changes as needed before the next run. And last but not least, validate your data. Post-migration, make sure the data coming into that new system matches the data coming from legacy. Your number of items, units of measure, numbers of transactions, your expected number of POs, inventory valuations, run those, etc. So of note, any legacy data modified using paint screens sometimes creates errors within the DMF process that will require some cleanup as well. So just wanted to point that out for any of you who may be using paint screens. Just be aware that it could cause an issue with your migration. All right, so enough about data. Let's talk staffing. Staffing during a migration, whether you use data conversion or DMF, is a consideration. So I kind of thought it pertinent for our discussion today. Who is or will be part of your implementation migration project? If your organization is small or has limited bandwidth for key users to be part of an implementation or migration and maintain those daily activities, consider staff augmentation to assist with the day-to-day. This way, your key users can dig in and learn the new system, be a part of the implementation, and have buy-in, while the daily activities are augmented by a competent partner. Plan who's going to perform the pre and post migration activities for the data conversion loads. DMF provides checklists for both pre and post migration, and these processes cover the running of jobs, ready the migration data into a state recommended or required for migration. Make sure the personnel involved have the proper security, or those that have it are invited to perform these activities, and that they are flexible to attend sessions to perform said activities. Your implementation partner will also help with this for tracking purposes and guidance, of course. Also, since DMF generally correlates with an implementation, begin thinking about your processes and the steps to perform them. FSM has a different look and feel from V10, so who knows your processes and can document them if they aren't already. Make these people part of your implementation in some capacity. These processes, especially if they deviate from a norm, should be used in your testing during SIT, your system integrated testing, and then during UAT or your user acceptance testing. Again, this portion is really not specific to DMF, but it is worth mentioning because you'll have downtime in between your runs, and the development of scripts that are going to be needed to test these processes could delay scheduling of those DMF runs. For our next section, I wanted to point out some items to consider regarding prioritization. Often clients moving from legacy Lawson to FSM just assume that since they're already versed in their current system, it will be an equal shift to FSM. But that's not so true. Though many of the processes translate, there are navigation and functionality differences with FSM, which users will need to familiarize and practice. Many of these differences could be discussed during the implementation, or they should be discussed during your implementation, but you'll want your users to be able to test their knowledge so your experts can hit the ground running and transfer knowledge to other users. Make your project the priority. Infor is your daily tool to manage the enterprise, from HR talent to supplies to financials. It's an investment in your future as an organization. Supply chain activities affect finance. Finance activities affect supply chain, and even payroll and HR. We're all interconnected with FSM. So as an organization, recognize and work to enhance communication and cohesiveness among teams instead of reinforcing, certain separation of duties, right? That doesn't mean buyers should be able to enter an invoice to pay a calling vendor, but there should be a clear and effective communication path for them to obtain the invoice and get it to AP for timely payment. With those two teams working together, right? At least begin thinking about how the process can improve. Communicate the need for success of the project from the top down. Put certain meeting series on hold to be available for project activities and milestones if you can. Or communicate these standing meetings with your implementation team to avoid scheduling conflicts and delays in activities. So very often during an implementation or during these DMF migrations, certain users can't, I I can't be on that call. I have to have another standing meeting, or I have this meeting. Is it? We're kind of at a time crunch here. We kind of need you. So if you can put those on hold, try to do so. Communicate status and milestones early and often to get users excited. Communicate education requirements at the project onset to your team and for them to know what to expect. Your implementation will most likely include structured end-to-end user training, but in many projects, the client just relies on your implementation team to train them on the ins and outs of the entire system, or they wait until SIT or UAT for it to be the first time these key users are accessing the system. Really encourage digging in and practicing with the new environment early on. This practice also aids in script development for all of your phases of your project. Infor has some excellent series on the daily activities in FSM, as well as any coming improvements, of course. Create excitement around the functionality of the new system and set your users up for success. And finally, preparation. What can you do now to prepare for your implementation methodology decision, right? If you choose to utilize DMF, you're saving time with loading the data. And we discussed preparation for that. Document your current processes, outline or develop standard operating procedures. This is not information just for users or organizations, but consultants as well. The time spent waiting for the data to be copied and migrated could be time spent preparing for the outcome. Outline and develop those standard operating procedures. What do you do today? What is our process for inventory replenishment or prepayments? How are we managing items for inspection? What do we do with overshipments? Do you actually know what the processes for your organization are for those activities? And then, what are the steps involved in these processes? Are there bottlenecks? Are there communication issues? These are all items that your implementation team needs to know outside of DMF to make this process run smoothly. Plan to really know what you're doing today and develop metrics for those processes. How long are we leaving purchase orders open? How quickly are we addressing buyer messages? And how quickly do we add, new item requests? Do we have frequent stockouts? Are we managing overstock and potentially obsolete items? Are we measuring this information? There are aspects of FSM that can help you keep up with your metrics. So the sooner your implementation team knows about them, the sooner they can work on you seeing them. Preparation before project inception gives your organization the upper hand for a successful project. Some other preparation considerations. Number one, prepare reports for replication. Jobs and reports are also, they don't come over with DMF, but organizing them in preparation for the post-migration activities is still pretty important, right? So preparing reports for replication, how are they produced? Are they LBI? Are they IPA? Are they an add-ins report? Who's using them? What data is contained in them? Generate any samples of these reports. It'll be very, very helpful moving forward with your implementation. You can create a spreadsheet for each of them, keep it up to date. This would be like your initial rice list for your project. Items that you'll want to test after your second DMF migration. Assess report use. Assess your scheduled jobs too for purpose and how often they run. We want a record of those as well, and keep, put them in a spreadsheet for your first price list, right? And then finally, assess your report use and perform, if you want, perform a screen test. This is like my favorite definition here. A screen test is for those reports where if you know the purpose or the users of those reports or activities, you can if you remove the access and see who screams about it, we can ascertain true need there. You'd be surprised at how many reports that you may not need, and your implementation developers will thank you. And then finally, determining if you use DMF for conversion is only one item to consider for your migration and may require broader analysis. No matter your migration strategy decision, consider additional factors that may affect your migration experience and make an informed decision. So thank you guys very much for your time today. Anne, do we have any questions?